So, hello and welcome, guys, to our next series of podcast, wherein we will be discussing more about aligning teams towards measurable growth. Often we find teams basically, struggles to, align their work, their priorities with the organization's goals. This could be due to lack of clarity. This could be, sometimes not getting the clear, vision or directions from the leadership. Probably, struggle at various levels, and that's the subject that we would like to discuss today and explore more. Today we have Andy Stockwell with us, who brings on board more than a couple of decades of experience, specifically into customer acquisitions, growth, customer retentions, pricing, product strategies. A very rich experience. He has worked with HP and has served as a CXO in his previous organizations. Welcome, Andy, to our podcast. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. Very, very glad to be here. Looking forward to talking to you.
Fantastic. So, Andy, before we begin and jump on to our question and answer, right? Would you like to go ahead and have a quick brief about you to our, audience?
Yeah, of course. So I worked for 20 years in started out as a startup and grew to a very successful organization in marketing technology. I started my career at HP. So I've always been involved with working with customers. So yeah, that's very much my focus is helping businesses grow. So yeah, today I have my own consultancy and essentially I help business leaders to grow revenues and increase retention. So that's what I spend my days doing today.
Fantastic. So a lot of people must definitely be excited, for our podcast today. Andy, generally now when you are acting as a growth consultant, right, for many organizations, and you have been serving bringing a mindset of a growth, right, in your previous organizations. Ideally, when you consult your customers, right, what do you really look for that first initial, analysis or the input, right, that helps you in understanding the potential barrier that lies in the company?
Yeah, well, every business is different. I think that's probably the first thing to say. So yeah, you never come across two that are exactly the same. So what I do is I go in and I do a growth gap analysis. So essentially I look at lots of different aspects of their business to understand what is limiting that growth. So that includes things like how they're positioned, both internally and externally, how customer-centric they are, and what sort of tools they're using, what sort of technology, but also what sort of processes. And really looking in detail at what that growth strategy is. So I actually recently worked with a startup who'd had a very good amount of investment. They'd hired some very good salespeople and an experienced marketing manager. They got a really good personalization SaaS product. But what was going on is those people who were relatively new to that business were not articulating that message particularly well. It wasn't overly customer centric. So from a customer point of view, they couldn't quite see the value of the product. So what I did with those guys is I basically worked out their new customer journey, and we reshaped that, and then we reshaped how they were doing the demo stage, and essentially that completely started to make sense from a customer point of view, how they could get value out of that product, and they started to significantly grow their pipeline from that point on.
No, I think it's a very valid point here, Andy, right? And more or less on the same note, right? I mean, my next question, inclines toward the same point, right? Once you identify such, barriers or the areas that which can help you in understanding the problem statement better, right? So, what are those first, quick wins that you like to have, right, within the company that helps them in realizing what they were not doing earlier?
Yeah, well, a very common issue that businesses have is they don't have any consistency across their business. So they have different departments all functioning in slightly different ways. And as businesses scale, that consistency can be lost even further, especially from a customer point of view. And often that's down to a lot of effort. So you've got a lot of people working really hard to try and improve their areas, but what they do is they go off on slight tangents that can then really confuse a customer. A good example I had on this was a business I worked with earlier in the year, and they had a really experienced sales team, and the leadership team saw the sales team as that catalyst for growth. So they invested a huge amount in that team. They'd, experienced people. They'd spent a lot of money on training, and essentially those guys were doing a great first intro. But what happened as they got closer to a deal, they brought in a very technical solutions team who essentially came in and talked a completely different language. So customers had got really comfortable with what they were buying. And then, a team that understood the product a lot more came in with a lot of jargon. So essentially what I did with these guys is I just started to reshape how that journey worked. So we brought that solutions team in a lot earlier in the process. And we also aligned the messaging so they were talking the same language. And again, made a massive difference to how this business started to communicate with customers from then on. Improved customer experience and sales.
Yeah. No, I think process, which I'm going to pick one of the important subject here, which is a process that you've mentioned, right? Which bring consistency in delivering what they have been doing it, right? And I think that gives more data point to them, which can then help them in terms of taking appropriate actions. But while doing it, right, and while you speak to many leaders, what do you think? What are the common, I won't say a mistake, but it's more of like the area that they missed, right, while scaling the business.
Yeah, again, I always say no two businesses are the same, but there are some common things that I see, especially when somebody's scaling a business. First of all, a very common one, leaders are trying to do too much themselves. So you've got, somebody who just absolutely believes in that business, are desperate for it to succeed. So they're throwing their efforts at every single possible area. So they're trying to be the best possible customer contact. They're trying to be the best possible salesperson. They're out on the road trying to do, conferences, etc. So it's about making sure you're using their time effectively. I'd say another big one is hiring for skills rather than cultural fit. I've seen many businesses, especially when they've got good funding at the start, where they're going out and they're just trying to hire the skills that they want. And essentially they then have this hodgepodge of personalities that actually don't work very well together. I'd also then say processes. Success can be the biggest limiting factor that you've got if your processes are not right, because essentially you can put too much pressure on different elements if your business is not actually built to scale. So you have to almost plan to build your processes for being much bigger than you are, so that as you do take off, you can take maximum benefit from that. A great example of this was actually my very first client. So they were an email marketing agency. They're actually a remote business. So they've got people all over Europe. And these guys have been hired for those real skills. They've all worked client side. Now, the challenge they had is essentially these guys all had their own processes and their own ways of working. So when a new client was brought on, you would be very much, the experience was based on the individual that you got. So essentially I worked with these guys to build a set of scalable processes. So when they brought a client on, it was done in a very consistent manner. So we did things like, a client onboarding process, account planning and account mapping that was consistent across the whole business. And that allowed the leadership team to do things at scale. They've just agreed a new proposal that I've given them. So I'm going to start working with those guys again next month, which will be great.
That's great. No, great to hear, right? So is there any framework or approach that you apply that helps them in aligning their business strategies or, aligning their teams with the business goals so that they understand things, how to take decisions appropriately?
For me, there's a big fundamental that I always recommend to my clients, and that's about having a very strong written down plan. It doesn't need to be war and peace, but it has to be communicated really clearly so people know exactly what's needed. And I would say to communicate that, build a story so that people can actually engage with it. It needs a project plan in there, but it needs to be more than a project plan. You need to get emotional buy-in from those people in that business. So you're not just getting attendance, you're getting their actual buy-in to help drive that growth. I work as a business coach also with a number of clients that I work with, and a lot of first-time CEOs that I work with, they're visionaries, they've built brilliant products, but they've actually not got that experience of, managing multiple teams over many years. A lot of people are on those early leadership journeys. So you can actually do a lot by bringing that experience to help them with those sorts of scaling challenges.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely right. I think this makes a lot of sense, right? So generally, let's take an example. While you continue to interact, learn, help them in terms of driving their business growth. What is that one advice you would like to give it to the CEOs or CXOs whom you generally either you interact or those who are focusing on building their product and taking out them into the market? What is that one advice that you want to share it with them while they are in the process of taking their product out in the market?
Yeah, I would certainly say about having a clear vision that everybody can buy into. So again, one of the biggest challenges in growing a business, especially in those early days, is making sure everyone is on that same journey as you. So making
Yeah.
sure you've got clearly understandable vision and mission so that everybody in the business can really understand where they're aiming as that business scales. So actually, I've done that very recently with a client of mine who's a very successful services business. They've got some unbelievably good clients, but a lot of their focus has been on their network and those people that they know very well. So I've really helped them to really make that new prospect vision mission really clear and succinct. And we're now working on some sort of tactical multi-channel campaigns that are going to help drive their growth.
I'll tell you, Andy, right? I mean, a lot of time, based on my experience, I've seen, in fact, it's an idea, right? I mean, that has inspired them to take the product onto the market. Probably they may be lacking in terms of vision, right? And that's a tough thing to define their vision so clearly, so right, so that they can see things clearly and which then be articulated right to the team, right? So how do you see things like in such cases while you are recommending them to have a clear vision? Is there any specific process or steps that you ideally recommend them that they should be following 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that gives them a clarity and helping them in converting their ideas into a vision?
Yeah, I sit down with them and their leadership team, and typically I do a workshop. So I get people together and really start to understand what is it that makes their business different, what is it that makes them tick, where do they want to get to, what makes them different to their competitors and people that they want to strive to be like. So again, doing a bit of analysis to help them really put that together so that it's really clear and then usable for the business.
No, got it. I think, yeah, so this summarizes our podcast, Andy, right? And thank you so much for all your inputs. I'm sure, right? I mean, some of the case studies that you talked about would definitely help our, people in terms of understanding how they should be thinking, right? When they are in the process of taking their products to their customers, right? To their target audience. Thank you so much for your time, Andy. And, I hope that this helps our audience.
Thank you very much. Good to talk to you all.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye bye.